What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Tech Interview Guide. I'm Ian Douglas. I'm the author of the website techinterview.guide. Yeah, just me tonight. No guests. I'm still dealing with shoulder surgery recovery stuff. So I only got like one usable arm these days. So I just haven't had the time for a lot of prep and so on. But it's okay. But in the last couple of weeks, because I took a week off of streaming, I had a whole bunch of questions kind of come in. So I wanted to spend tonight just going over a whole bunch of questions that were submitted. I don't know whether we'll get through 5 questions or 20 questions. I have no idea. But definitely drop some stuff in chat if you got questions. I did have one come in over LinkedIn today that I want to address as well. So yeah, grab yourself a tasty beverage. I can't tell you what I'm drinking, but I can give you a clue. Watermelon mint. It's actually a really good flavor. Um, so yeah, drop questions in chat. I'll definitely interact as we go. And aside from that, we'll get started. So the first question that I had: how do you answer this interview question? Tell me a time when you had to set another goal and change your orientation. Now, by the wording of the question, changing your orientation, I guess, is like change your direction. So any kind of question that starts with tell me about a time, they definitely want you to tell some kind of story. You do need to be careful how long you're spending telling that story. You don't want to go on and on and on. I was recently writing up something for an article, hopefully that's going to be coming out in a couple of weeks, from builtin.com. And they were asking, like, what one question can you ask to get like tons of information? And I wrote up one question that's kind of my favorite. It's one of my favorites. And the thing that I wanted to kind of caution about, though, is it's a little bit dangerous to try to condense so much stuff into a single question and a single answer, that you don't overwhelm the candidate. With a whole "tell me about a time when," where their answer has to be so involved and so detailed that it goes on for like 10, 15 minutes, because then they start to lose scope of the question that you've asked and whether they've answered it fully and completely to your satisfaction, and then that just kind of cascades into even more anxiety about the interview when they're already nervous. So as much as possible, I like to try to keep my questions fairly simple when I'm interviewing someone else. So for a question like this, tell me about a time you had to set another goal and change your direction. I think that this question could also be posed like, tell me about a time that you had to set like an additional goal and then choose between, your original goal and the new goal. Like, how do you prioritize your time, or how did you determine which one was more important? And I think this is a good question for a lot of reasons. In an interview, I want to hear about how you deal with teamwork and collaboration, and especially with communication. And when it comes down to ideas behind, um, how do you work as part of a team? How do you work in a company? And what happens if we have to change your focus from one thing to another? Or how do you as an individual change your focus from one thing to another, where you're trying to figure out the right words here, where you're trying to figure out a priority on things. Now, depending on your level of experience, as a senior dev, you're going to be looked at to sort of set the pace and set that tone. If you're earlier in your career, you haven't even started your tech career yet, somebody else should be setting that priority for you. But if you're given two things and you're told they're kind of both important, which one is really more important? And there's kind of a saying that goes, when everything is important, nothing's important. Because if everything has equal priority and equal urgency to try to finish, then it doesn't matter which one you do if they're all supposedly equal importance. So I would say, if you have a question about what you should be working on, you should ask somebody and say, hey, I've got these things, they're the same sort of priority. I want to make sure that I'm working on the right thing. What do I do? Back to the original question, tell me about a time when. They want you to tell some kind of story. I typically try to cap my stories between 2 minutes and 5 minutes. So you do need to have some self-awareness over how long you're spending answering the question, but you want to make sure that you're answering the question as completely as possible. So for this one in particular, again, just to kind of go over it, where you had to set another goal and then think about your priorities, um, they really just want to hear how you manage competing priorities at that point. And I think the answer depends a lot on sort of your seniority level and whether you get to set that priority yourself or whether somebody else is going to be kind of guiding you in that priority. The next two questions I was asked are really similar, and it's a really good segue into something that I've mentioned on the stream a couple of times, but I want to reemphasize. And the question is, how do you properly answer the question, "Tell me about yourself"? Or someone else asked specifically, what are some points to mention in "Tell me about yourself" in an interview for a big data position? And I mean, they're really one and the same. I'm not asking for your life story. When I ask, "Tell me about you," I'm really asking you to describe to me why I should hire you. Like, what is it about you? What is it about your background? What is it that you feel is important to tell me about you that's going to convince me to hire you? I've said on the stream when we deal with resume reviews that when I'm looking at resumes, I'm looking for a reason to say no. But if I'm interviewing you, I'm looking for a reason to say yes. I want these interviews done. I want to just hire somebody already. I don't want to have to interview 100 people. I want to interview like 5 people and make a decision. So the sooner I can find that person, the better. And so if you can answer a question like, "Hey, tell me about you. Tell me about your background," they're really asking, like, why should I hire you? What's important about your background? What's important about your experience that's going to fit in extremely well at our company and make me want to hire you? So one thing that I've mentioned on the stream, but I haven't really talked about too much, is a daily email series that I wrote. And I wrote it a couple of years ago, and I've been updating the information over time. And it's basically it's a 6-week series, and you get an email every day. They send out at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, um, so 7 a.m. Pacific and 10 a.m. Eastern Time in North America. And what it is for 6 weeks, you get an email every day that basically describes one or more technical interview questions. Some of them are behavioral, like "Tell me about a time when," and some of them are technical in nature, like "How do you do such and such a thing in your programming language of choice?" Um, but in my emails, I don't really go into the detail of how to come up with the perfect answer. What I try to do in these emails is explain from my perspective as an interviewer why this question is important to me or why this kind of question might be important to my company. And there's questions in there about culture, and there's questions in there about like deep internals about how the web works or how the internet works or how what kind of like daily culture do you want to fit into? And so you get several of these questions kind of posed in an email. The emails are meant to be like 5 to 10 minutes worth of reading in the morning, sometimes less. They're not meant to be huge, and they're not meant to answer the question. In some of the technical ones, I do go into a little bit of the technical relevance on, tell me about HTTP status codes, or tell me about a time that you built an API. I am looking for specific sort of stories or specific kinds of answers. And so the email series you can find by going to techinterview.guide, and you'll see it very prominently on there. It's called the Daily Email Series. It's 6 weeks long. It's free to subscribe. All of my content is free. I don't make money on it at all. If you want to donate, there's like a buy me a coffee link on the website. But I don't do this to make money. So it's free. You can join whenever you like. There is a double opt-in. So when you give me your email address, it'll send you an email with a link that you have to click on. If you don't click on that link, you don't get subscribed. If you click on the link, you'll get another follow-up email going, "Cool, we got you. You'll get your next email tomorrow." And then that kicks off the 6-week series. As soon as it's done, the software that I wrote for the mailing list purges you completely out of the database. You'll never hear from me again. I'm not a big fan of remarketing, like when something's done and then they keep bugging you about other things. I'm not a fan of that, and so I don't do it to other people. So my email series, when you finish or when you unsubscribe, that's the last you're ever going to hear from me. Now, if you unsubscribe and then decide to resubscribe later, you will have to contact me because of the email service that I use. When you unsubscribe, you actually unsubscribe from them, and any message I try to send you just gets dropped. And so if you try to resubscribe later, subsequent messages that I try to send you will just get dropped and they won't go through. So if you want to resubscribe later, you'll have to contact me and I'll get that fixed up for you. But the very first email that you get in the email series is a whole answer to tell me about yourself. So feel free to check that out if you want a little bit longer explanation. All right, the next one that I got, I accidentally sent my resume to a wrong job position and I got an email reply saying they want to set me up for an interview. What do I do? Oops. That's a pretty unusual kind of scenario. If that has happened, I would contact them immediately and I would respond to the email and say, hey, I realize I actually applied for the wrong job. I wouldn't worry too much about like, oh, they're going to think I'm dumb or something like that. They won't. It's an easy mistake to make, especially with online forums and things like that. What I would do is I would correct it as early as possible. Don't start the interview process with them without correcting that first. Otherwise, you kind of give them like a false sense of hope that they've found a candidate for that other role. And so you want to be upfront as soon as possible, as early as possible, and let them know like, hey, I messed up. It's on me. Sorry. I really meant to apply for this job and I want to make sure that I'm in the right pipeline for the right job. Now, it could be that, they've got tons of other applicants for that other job and there's just no more space to get you interviewed for that. And so there is a possibility that if you do that, they're going to say like, okay, well, then never mind. So, but I think it would be dishonest for you to go through the interview sessions and process and then pull a switch on them and say, oh, by the way, I didn't really want that job. I really want this other job instead. Or do that as part of the interview. Like, where do you see yourself in a year? Well, I see myself doing this other role that I meant to apply to. That's just going to feel weird in the interview. So don't do that. Just be upfront as soon as possible and let them know to correct it. And it should be okay. Like I said, the worst thing that'll happen is they'll say like, oh, sorry, we've got like a ton of other candidates for that role that we're already considering. And, you may have to reapply later or you're just going to lose out on that company. Next question. What are people looking for when they ask why you are the best candidate for the job? I can say that my unique experience and skills make me the best, but isn't that what most candidates say? Yep. Again, going back to the previous question about tell me about yourself, the idea here is I'm asking for your perspective on why you think you're sort of aligned with the company for what we do. Yes, it's certainly, you have the right skills. Everybody's bringing unique experience. So I would say like, don't answer it with the actual words like I have unique experiences and skills that make me the best candidate for this role. You need to explain what those experiences are and what those skills are. You can't just say you're the best and leave it at that. So again, you still need to explain because I'm bringing a certain background and I bring these particular skills. Now I got Liam Neeson in my head. I have a particular set of skills. I think you still need to be able to describe at a very intricate sort of level why you are the best person for that job, and not be cliche about it or make it sound like you're just saying the same buzzwords that everybody else is saying. Your answers should never be buzzword. They should be legitimate, personalized kinds of explanations about why they really should hire you. And if you subscribe to the email series, the very first email that you'll get on day one will go into that in a lot more detail. I had a question come in over LinkedIn, and again, you're welcome to drop questions in chat. I will take questions in chat and add those in the mix as we go. So drop those in, or just drop a hello. Let me know you're there. The question that I got on LinkedIn was asking about a couple of particular companies and mention them by name, and I'm not sure I want to mention them by name on the stream, but they were basically saying that there are a couple of companies and other career accelerators, as they call them, that try to mentor you into a job in exchange for payment after you get that job. And so it's kind of like an internship where you don't get paid, but instead you sort of work for them and they give you some extra coaching and some extra training, and then they send you back out into the out into the job hunt rather. And when you find a job, you owe them a chunk of money. I'm not a fan of that, to be honest. I think that if you've gone to school, you probably already have the skill you need. If you're finding that you're having problems with things like the job hunt and getting applications and getting someone to look at your resume, that's why I'm here. You can also tune into the Jonan Show on Wednesdays. If anybody's familiar with that, if you could drop it into chat, I can try to type it, but I'm only typing with one hand. It is the Jonan Show. Jonan Scheffler has a whole group of people, and they hang out on Wednesday nights on Twitch. And they have a fantastic stream where they talk about all kinds of questions. And between Jonan's stream and my stream, I think if you pay attention to us and ask advice of us, we're going to help you out as much as we can. That's what we're here for. We're here to help build up community and help each other out. And I occasionally drop in on his stream just to chat and kind of help with my perspectives. But I mean, it's his stream, so I don't try to bombard anything by any stretch. But I think that there are a lot of free resources out there that you can get access to and get help to. That said, I think there is some valid reasons for pushing for an internship type of role where you actually, like, it's a paid internship that could then maybe turn into a full-time role with that company. So you could certainly ask the company if they have internship level roles. So the person who was asking, they're very early in their career. And they said, I'm struggling to get my foot in the door. So I'm just curious what to do. If you're having a problem getting your foot in the door, I would ask why. And the advice that I gave to this person over LinkedIn today was find a senior level dev who can give you mock interviews that can then give you feedback on what's going on. Is it the resume? Like, are you just not getting phone calls? Or are you getting phone calls and that initial phone screen doesn't go well? Or is the phone screen going okay, but then once you get into the real interview, like that technical phone screen doesn't go okay? Or are you getting to the on-site and that's not going okay? Like, we need a little more input as far as like what part of the interview process are you not getting your foot in the door? Thanks for the follow. Appreciate the follow, Stephen Yeet. Good to have you on the stream. So I would say if like once you get an idea of where you're having a problem, then we can help you focus on, hey, when I get into kind of the HR behavioral phone screen, I'm not doing so well. Great, we can help you on behavioral questions and stuff like that. If you're applying for a job and you're not even getting a phone call, it could be your resume. And I do live resume reviews on the stream from time to time. You can check out techinterview.guide/streaming. In the chat, you can do bang resume and it'll give you as a command, and it'll give you some information on how to submit a resume to me that's a little bit anonymized, like you can anonymize your name and so on. And I'll do a live resume review on the stream for you. So you can just type bang resume or like !resume in the chat on Twitch, and it'll give you some information about that. So it really depends on where you're having a problem in the process, but there are people out there who absolutely want to help you. So you're not alone. Sometimes it feels like you're alone when you're home and you're just applying for jobs and you're not getting phone calls, but you have to know where you're having the problem to identify how to fix the problem. So feel free to get in touch with me and we can chat, or, like I said, check out Jonan's show as well. He's very friendly to like code school folks and early career folks, but he's also like a wealth of knowledge on a ton of other areas as well. So check out the Jonan Show on Wednesdays, or just hang out on my stream Sundays and Thursdays and ask questions in chat, or drop me a line on LinkedIn. You can do !LinkedIn to get my LinkedIn info. You can do !Twitter, I think, to get my Twitter info. Like, connect with me. Figure out like how to get in touch with me. I'm Ian Douglas 736 on most places, and figure out how to get in touch with me. Or you can just email me, ian.douglas@techinterview.guide, and let's have a chat. Cool. All right, moving on to the next question. what is an automatic no in an interview for a hiring manager or supervisor? This is an interesting question. Um, I don't know that I've ever been in an interview where someone's answer was like an immediate, okay, we have to shut everything down. We are no longer interviewing you. Thanks for coming in. Um, there have been times where I've interviewed somebody and throughout the process of it, realized like they're not a candidate or they're not going to be qualified for some reason. um, at which point I try to be as upfront and as honest as I can with them and try to give them some feedback right away. There was one point in a technical interview where someone just kind of like, oh, I can't do this tech challenge. Like, I'm really stuck and I don't know what to do. And they got really frustrated with themselves and they were really down, but they just shut down. Like, they didn't even try. They didn't even want to try to continue. At that point, it's like, all right, well, the interview's over. Like, like we can't move forward in the interview process unless we get over this step. There was another one that I wrote about on Quora.com. It's had like a ton of views and a ton of votes and whatever about the question was specific, like, is there like a blacklist in the tech industry where if you get blacklisted from one company, like no one else is going to talk to you? And my answer is like, no, but let me tell you about a time where, this guy, I did a phone screen, everything sounded good. I had him do a take home challenge. He submitted it. It looked great. I brought him on site and had him work on the tech challenge, but his friend wrote the tech challenge for him and he didn't know what to do. So when I had him try to fix a bug and try to implement some other features, he had no idea what to do. And that was also kind of an automatic shutdown of like, okay, well, the interview's over. Like, you're not going to get the job. But I try to be as fruitful as possible as far as like giving them feedback up to that point. I'm a big fan of giving people feedback. There are a lot of companies out there that think, oh, well, if we give them feedback and they think it's discriminatory or prejudiced or something like that, we're going to get sued. Literally nobody has been sued for that kind of thing. And so I wish more companies were just more forthcoming about giving feedback. You can check out a previous stream that we did with, who was on the stream that night? I think that was with Spencer and, was it with Spencer? I think it was with Spencer and Aaron. We literally talked about like how no one has ever been sued for that, and how like the three of us, Spencer and Al, and goofed up his name. Sorry. Spencer and Aaron. Sorry. How we both like all three of us really love giving feedback to people, and we think it's an important part of the interview process, because just to get told no, but not why, and not how to improve, doesn't help anything at all. Like, companies need to be more willing to give feedback. So I guess the theme of the question, like, is there like an automatic no? I would say like if you give us a clear indication that you don't want to continue, and that can look like a lot of things for a lot of people. But I've had people like get super nervous and like start to get really frustrated at themselves. And I usually give them an option like, do you want to continue another day? Do you want to like, take a break and start again? Like, it's not like an immediate shutdown, escort them to the door. Like, that's not a thing in tech. At least no interview I've ever run. So cool. All right, continuing on. Actually, I'm gonna have a little water break here. Stay hydrated. It is super smoky and super polluted out here in Denver these days, so it's good to keep the throat clear and so on. Next question on the list. I completed the final interview. My references were called. They asked my salary expectations, and here we are with silence. Should I count that as a loss? I would contact them back and say like, hey, what's up? Bug them until they tell you to go away. I would continue to email them on a regular basis. I would say if you got that far where they were asking salary expectations and you know that they called your references, chances are pretty good they're very close to making a decision and they should let you know one way or the other. My suspicion is that if it's been more than a couple of days since they called your references and they still haven't contacted you, you're probably second place, maybe third place. that somebody else probably got the offer and they're waiting to hear from them to know whether to move forward with you. Hey, thanks for the follow, AG250. Hope I got that right, or AJE250. Thanks for the follow. Appreciate you hanging out on the stream tonight. Yeah, so that would be my guess, is that you're probably like second place, third place, and that they're waiting, that they've made an offer to someone else and they're waiting to hear back from that person. If that happens, I'm sorry, but that's the reality of it. They do kind of rank people and go, okay, I'm going to call this person first. If they don't take it, I'm going to call this person next. But there's no harm in you contacting them and say, hey, I know you've reached out to my references. We've finished all the interviews. I'm just curious, like, where things stand. I'm still super interested. Like, don't just leave the question at that. Like where are we in the process? You do need to like show appreciation, show gratitude for them taking the time to interview you. Say, hey, I really appreciate the time everybody took. I'm still super interested in the role, still super interested in the company. Just curious where we stand. I'd like to get some feedback. I would say also, don't tell them this, but like, don't stop interviewing. Don't just put the brakes on everything else and wait for them thinking you're going to get a job offer. Continue to do interviews, continue to do networking and outreach and all the things. Keep moving forward as if you have no possible prospect for a job. It could be that, you know, they've made an offer and they're in negotiations and they just haven't told you yet. But I would hope that there's some redeeming factor in there where, you know, they're going to get in touch with you in some context soon. But I would say follow up with them. If generally, as soon as the interview is over, I would say, like, give it a couple of days. And if you don't hear from them in that couple of days, that's okay. But give them a couple of days. They probably have a lot of interviews going on. And like I said, they're kind of ranking the people that they interviewed to try to figure out who they want to make an offer to. So give them some time to get through that. Once they get through that process, then you can certainly reach out to them and say, hey, I'm still interested. Haven't heard any feedback yet. I'd like to get some feedback on how things went. Still super interested in the role. Still want to be a part of this company. You know, I feel like I'm a good fit, blah, blah, blah. And just ask them for feedback. And then follow up 1 week later if you don't hear anything back from that. If you don't hear anything from that email, because usually that second reminder, they're like, oh, shoot, I really meant to get back to Ian. Let me sit down right now and write them that response. You're more likely to get a response right away later. If you still get no answer, it feels like you're getting ghosted, to be honest. And that sucks. And that's another thing about our interview process and what goes on in our tech industry that absolutely needs to stop. People need to stop just ghosting people. I think it's a dumb thing to do, and it just burns your reputation as a company. So if you're a company and you're watching this, please stop doing that. Like, if you've gone through any stage of the interview process with a candidate, please give them feedback and let them know that they're not moving forward or that they are moving forward. Like, give them some indication one way or the other. All right. So again, if you're hanging out live on stream, hey, we got a question. Just as I was going to say, like, feel free to drop a question in chat. So AG250, would you say continuing to apply to multiple different job openings to the same tech company after failing an assessment or interview is a bad idea? Some companies will ask you to wait like 4 months to 6 months before reapplying. I would say if you've applied for a job and you didn't make it through that process and you immediately turn around and apply for another job, it would depend on what the role of that job is, but it's going to feel a little bit weird for them. Like if you apply for a software developer job, for example, and you don't pass their interview and you immediately turn around and reapply for another software developer job, they're probably not even going to call you because they're like, we just interviewed this person. Like, we don't need to go through that again. We just told them no. If it's a different kind of role, like let's say you applied for a software developer job and you didn't get it, and you want to apply for like a QA job or something like that, where like you still really believe in the company, I would say that's probably okay. But make sure that when you write up that cover letter that you're explaining, hey, I just went through the process for this other role and I didn't get the job, but I still really believe in the company. I still really believe in what you do. I still want to be a part of this company. And I'm willing to consider other roles. I don't know that you would even need to like actually apply for those other jobs. I would probably just reach out to any recruiter that you've already been in contact with. Like you're going to have a point of contact in the company anyway. I would reach out to them and say, "Hey, I didn't make it through that process, but I'm still super interested and I see all these other roles that I'd like to be considered for as well. What do you think I should do?" And let them direct you. They may say like, wait a month and then apply, or yeah, let's get you in the process for that right away. It depends on where, like how far you got through their process before they told you no. If you got through like some of the initial screenings and then like during the actual like on-site interview or something like that, that's when they said no. They've probably already got enough information about like, yeah, you seem like a decent enough person and have good enough knowledge that we could probably move ahead, but then you just didn't pass that particular tech interview. Um, they might have other roles in mind and say, you know what about this other role? And so, yeah, definitely reach out to them and ask them. But again, it depends on the role. So you don't want to like just keep applying for the same role over and over and over again. They're just not going to call you. Um, so yeah, just keep that in mind. But I would say there's no harm in reapplying, but give yourself a little bit of time. Like reflect on what didn't go well in the interview. Practice those things. Again, if you can get some feedback from them on what went well or what didn't go well. If not, you're going to have to kind of use your own sort of feeling on how the experience went and what you did well or not well. And then practice the things that didn't go well. Find someone to do mock interviews with. You can do a bang pramp in the chat, and you'll get information about a promo code that I have on Pramp that should give you unlimited interviews on their platform. You can also do a bang with interviewing-io and get some information about interviewing.io. It's a referral link that you can go do mock interviews over there as well. But do some mock interviews and get some feedback from people that you trust that can help you understand like where things went wrong. Cool. Thanks for the question, AG. Appreciate that. The next one was a little bit funny. It said, what interview question is more like sinking in quicksand than when you're asked, why did you leave your previous job? And it's kind of funny. It's like, is there any possible worse question to be asked than why did you leave your previous job? There are worse questions to be asked. Some of them are just impossible and so on to answer. Why did you leave your previous job is an important one if you've already left that job. So if you left that job and it's been a little bit of time that you've been unemployed, they're going to ask like why you left that job. Depending on why you left, you need to be honest with them. You need to be upfront with them and say, I quit because it was like a really bad environment. You don't want to be too negative about it. Like, oh, my manager was like, total, bleep, bleep, bleep kind of person. Like you don't want to be too negative about the company. You don't want to be too negative about the experience. Especially if you got dismissed from the job, you don't want to be super negative about it. You always want to try to put a positive spin on things if you can. But if it was something like, oh, COVID happened and we all got laid off and now I'm just, I took some time off and now I'm looking for another job. It's like, yeah, you and millions of other people, no one's going to blink at that. If you got into a scenario where just the work environment was really, really poor, and you just had to get out of there, I think some companies are going to understand that as well. But again, you have to be careful how you present that kind of answer to them. Again, you don't want to be too negative about the company, but you could just say like it was just not a good fit, and we parted ways. Like you can say like, I wasn't dismissed from the job, but I decided, that it wasn't a good place to stay, and I wanted to take my career in a different direction. Or I wanted to take my skills in a different direction. Like you can always spin it in a way that makes it sound like it was your choice to leave and that you're deciding to go do something else. But yeah, some of those questions are kind of like morale sucking sort of questions where it just makes you feel really down. Especially if you got dismissed from a job. It doesn't feel good to get dismissed and then have to explain why you got dismissed from a job or asked to resign or something like that. But I think you do need to be honest about it, but I think you can still spin it in a way that puts you in a positive light. Just be careful not to speak too negatively about your employer. Looks like we got another one from chat. Paul, good to see you in chat, buddy. Hope you're doing well. How many different roles should I actively pursue at any given moment? All of them. Um, Paul was one of my students at Turing. Good to see you in chat. And thanks for the follow earlier. I saw you subscribed. Um, it depends how many you want to try to juggle at the same time, to be honest. I would say everyone's going to be a little bit different. Some people just, they've got a lot going on in life and they can handle one thing at a time. Some people are like, all I have right now is unemployment. And so all I have is time to apply for jobs and keep track of these things. And they might apply for several jobs every day. It really depends on you and your scenario. I would say tailoring a resume and a cover letter for every job is still vitally important. Getting to know people is still important. So doing like coffee chats and doing your network and your outreach, all that stuff that we taught you at Turing, keep doing all that stuff. But how many you do really depends on how much time you have and how much time you want to dedicate. If you're already working and you want to try to find a new job, how much time do you want to spend looking for that new job? You can do your networking, via email and so on in the evening. Sometimes it's easier to get in touch with people in the evenings because they're not taking time away from work. But it really depends on everybody else's scenario. I would say, try to have at least a couple things going at any one time. Because again, if you only apply for one job, when you apply for that job, it may take several days for them to even contact you. From there, it might take a week to schedule an interview. From there, it might take several days to get through the interview process. And then it might take several days to hear back from them. Next thing you know, like 2 or 3 weeks have gone by. And if that doesn't work out, you're starting all over again. And now you've lost out on 2 or 3 weeks. If you've already got a job, that's probably not a big deal. If you don't have a job, that can be a pretty big deal. That's almost a full month gone. And so again, it depends on your scenario. It depends on how much time you have to dedicate to this kind of stuff. And how much time you have sort of like mentally and emotionally to put into a job hunt, because it is a lot of work and it is a lot of pressure on yourself to try to do things right and to try to answer questions and take lots of phone calls and things like that. I would say as soon as you start getting to like on-site interviews, then maybe like don't apply to too many more. Because if you do get an offer, then you've got to turn around and like shut all those other ones down, which is fine. It's a good problem to have if you get an offer. But I would say like do it at a manageable level. Don't apply for like 50 jobs every day, because then if you start getting 50 phone calls a day, like a couple of days later, that's going to be a lot to juggle and a lot to manage and a lot to schedule. I mean, honestly, if you apply for 50 jobs, you might get calls from 5, but still, depending on your resume and depending on your experience in the background and like how you're presenting yourself to those companies, you might end up in high demand. So it will vary a little bit from person to person. So there's no one answer on that. But yeah, good to see you on chat, Paul. I hope you're doing well. Next one on my list. How important is it to learn JavaScript as a programmer? Depends what kind of programming you want to do. JavaScript is being used for a lot of things. It's still like, a huge percentage of the use of JavaScript is for front-end development, for browser-based applications and mobile-based applications, using things like React Mobile and so on. But there is a lot of like back-end development happening in JavaScript, but back-end JavaScript, depending on your environment and the kind of code that you're writing and what it's doing, may not be as performant as other languages. How important is it that you learn JavaScript? If you're a backend developer and you're applying for a backend role that requires JavaScript, then it's important to learn JavaScript. So like many other answers tonight, I'm going to say it depends. And it feels like kind of a cop-out as an answer, but it depends on what you want to do with your career. If you want to be sort of the quote-unquote full-stack engineer, you're going to have to learn some JavaScript. If you want to be able to kind of move around on a team and be able to fit in comfortably in different kinds of roles, you'll probably want to learn some JavaScript. Is it absolutely necessary if you're like just doing backend development, just doing like API design and stuff like that? Probably not. But again, it depends on the kinds of companies. So I think it's okay to like dabble in it, maybe do a project or two. But I don't know. I mean, if you want to be an expert in it, go be an expert in JavaScript. There's nothing wrong with it. It's an okay language. It's not as performant as other compiled languages, but neither are Python and Ruby. I mean, all the high level interpreted languages are going to be slower than compiled languages right now. Given today's hardware and the state of interpreters versus compilers and things like that. That's just the reality of it. A compiled language is always going to be faster. So if you're doing backend development work, a compiled language is generally going to be faster all the time. But it also comes into play, like I could write really lousy Java code and really lousy C# or Go code that performs worse than highly optimized, highly efficient JavaScript. So, I mean, it depends on who's writing the code as well. So how important is it? Again, it kind of depends on whether it's important to you for where you want to take your career. So hopefully that helps on there. Cool. And keep dropping questions in chat. I haven't had any new ones come in on LinkedIn. I kind of put out on LinkedIn and Twitter, like if you got more questions, feel free to DM me. But it doesn't look like any others have come in, but that's okay. Cool. So I'll keep going on these. What are the questions that can be asked when the interviewer says, any questions? So to kind of rephrase this, usually at some point in the interview, they're going to ask you, do you have any questions for me? It's generally pretty important to have some kind of question prepared and ready to ask them. One of the worst things you can do is say, nope, I have no questions. You should have some kind of questions. You should have probably 2 or 3 questions prepared and ready to go. I generally advise people, like, don't have like 10 or 15 questions and expect them all to get answered. Because by the time they get to the point where it's like, do you have any questions for me? There's probably only a couple of minutes left. They may only have time to answer 1 or 2. And so I would say the first question to ask would be, I have a lot of questions. Do you want me to email you some of them? Like we can get through maybe a few of them now, but I've got some questions that I would really like to know the answers to, but I want to be respectful of your time. So if we don't get through all of them, could I email them to you, or could we have a follow-up conversation another time? Always ask them those kinds of questions. I think that would be an important show of respect for them and their time, so that you're not like, yes, question 1 of 50. If you have a moment, it's like, oh gosh, 50 questions. That's going to take a while to go through. It also depends on the nature of the questions. I think the questions that you should ask will vary depending on who is interviewing you. So if it's somebody in an HR position, they're going to have very different kinds of questions for you as a technical interviewer would have. And likewise, you should have different questions for them. So for an HR person, you could have questions about kind of the company culture as a whole. And then maybe when you're interviewing with the engineering team, you could ask about, like, does the engineering team have a culture of its own? I think that would be a kind of a good differentiation there. And I mean, there are going to be tons and tons of guides online of like what questions to ask companies. And, whether you should say like, how did I do? Do you have any feedback for me? And kind of ending the interview with that kind of question. That one can be a little dangerous because sometimes they won't want to answer because they're still writing up notes and they still have to go through like a scoring rubric and things like that. So you probably won't get a good answer to that right away. They'll probably just kind of shrug it off and say, we've got factors to look into, but we will get back to you or something like that. And hopefully they do. But when they ask you, do you have any questions for us? You should always have questions prepared to ask them. Absolutely. I think I might only get through like 1 or 2 more. We'll kind of see how it goes. If there are other questions in chat, definitely drop those in for me as well. Is it bad to get a job through a staffing agency? Do staffing agencies pay employees in cash? I have a very strong love-hate relationship with staffing agencies. In the tech industry, we also call them headhunters, which is a bit of a derogatory term when you think about how that term came to be. But I've got a whole section of blog articles on iandouglas.com that you can go read. Not right now. Pay attention to the stream. That's why you're here. But I've got a whole bunch of blog articles, and a lot of them honestly are like 10, 15 years old, and so they may not even qualify anymore. But I think in staffing agencies, the idea there is they're trying to get a resume from you so that they can shotgun your resume out to 50 jobs at a time. And so you think you're only applying for a job at a staffing agency when really they're sort of shopping you around to other people. Um, Now, I've also had a job in the past where I got hired as an employee of a staffing agency to go work at one of their clients, and that's what they call staff augmentation. And doing staff augmentation is actually a pretty good role because you've always got a job with the staffing agency, but it's their job to go get you a job at some other company. And so the questions that you want to ask them are, how do you keep your pipeline full? What happens if you don't have a job for me to go to? Do I still get paid? Like, do you have work internally that I can work on if I'm not at a client site? That kind of staffing agency is very different from the kind that I mentioned at the beginning of the answer, where we talk about them as like third party recruiters, where you're giving them a resume and they're shopping your resume out to other companies. Those kinds of people, they can be helpful earlier in your career. Later in your career, they're just annoying, and you just tell them to go away, and hopefully they do. But early in your career, it can be a good way to find a job. But in my experience, entry level jobs, it's harder to kind of pitch those kinds of jobs. Um, Typically, those kinds of staffing firms, they're going to get 15 to 20% of your annual salary as a kickback from the company when you get hired. And companies, as many of you on the stream and watching this on YouTube later, are finding as an entry level dev, it's already pretty hard to find a job. Trying to convince a staffing agency that you're worth taking a chance on is going to be hard because they're going to have a harder time getting your resume into hands of people just to get 15 or 20% of a lower salary. They would rather go after someone like me who's going to get a much, much higher salary because that 15 to 20% kickback that they get typically after 90 days or 6 months of me working there, that percentage that they get is way higher than for an entry level dev, where maybe you're making 60 to 80k, maybe 90k. But if I'm going out and getting a job for like 250, 300k, that percentage is obviously way higher, and so it's way more lucrative for them to target senior engineers. But then there's this other kind of staffing agency that we call staff augmentation. And sometimes those are called consultancy firms, where you go and you become an employee of that consultancy firm and then they hire you out to other companies. Excuse me, I need some water. Those kinds of companies, you actually learn quite a lot. In my experience, and I'm hoping to get a couple of folks on the stream at some point who have actually worked for those kinds of consultancy firms, just to kind of hear their experience and what it's like jumping from project to project. Generally, those kinds of companies, they will rotate you through projects every 4 months to 6 months. And so if you're the kind of person where you constantly like something fresh and new all the time, it's actually a really good place to work. If you like the focus and the dedication of like, I want to learn one thing really well, it's not as good of a job, because you're going to be bounced around from project to project, maybe in different technologies. And the other danger with getting those kinds of jobs is if you go work on site for that customer of theirs, you're looked at as an expert. They're paying a lot for you to be there. Generally, they're paying your company anywhere from 2 to 3 times what your company is paying you. So let's say I go to a staffing firm and I make 100K. They're charging that other business like 250,000 a year, like worth of like a couple of months of salary to have you there. And so that other company is paying quite a lot for you to be there. And they're like, you better be super productive and you better be an expert in all the things. And if I ask you a question, you better have an answer. And so there can be a lot of pressure put on you for that kind of thing. And the folks that I want to have on the show, we're going to get into those kinds of details just so you can all hear what it's like to be at that kind of role. So the second part of the question was, do they pay employees in cash? Very few places actually pay in actual cash. You're going to get some sort of like bank transfer or something at best. but they're probably not going to hand you cash at the end of the day or at the end of the week. That's not a typical way of doing business in the tech industry. Now, if it's like a temp agency or something like that where you're doing non-technical work, then maybe they'll pay you in cash. But again, it's not very likely because they've got to track that kind of stuff, legally for taxes and government tracking and all that kind of stuff. So they're probably not just going to hand you cash. It'll have to go through like typical payroll kinds of things. Cool. I think I'm going to do one more and then maybe wrap up if there's no other questions in chat. Um, This one is kind of an interesting one. Will Angular replace traditional methods of web programming? I think we could probably abstract this question. Will fill in the blank replace other, fill in the blank kinds of technologies? Like, is this database going to kill all the other databases, or is this language going to kill all the other languages, or is this framework the very best one? The answer is always no on that. In the time that I've been streaming tonight, 46 minutes worth, there are probably like 5 new JavaScript frameworks released. Um, so no, there's no like one technology that's going to kill everything else. Uh, I mean, that said, kind of going back to a previous question about like, should I learn JavaScript? I mean, JavaScript is a pretty good language to know in development, but again, it depends what kind of development you want to do. Um, but I don't know that there's like any one technology that is an absolute must have and that your career is going to falter if you don't have it. Likewise, I don't think that there's one technology that is going to like overcome all the rest and say, if you learn Python, you're set for life, nothing else can touch it. That's just simply not the case. I mean, it kind of feels that way sometimes in tech, but I've been doing this for 25 years. I started out writing Perl. That was kind of the hot thing for like CGI based scripts, Common Gateway Interface, back in the day for submitting forms. That kind of gave way to other programming languages like PHP, and everyone was like, oh, PHP is the best thing ever. And then it quickly fell out of favor with a lot of folks. Um, and so, like, every couple of years, there's some new programming language you must learn. You must know the following thing. It's been Python for a long time, and then it's like Go and Rust and Elixir and like all these like, you know, sort of micro niche kinds of flavor of the month kind of things. So I don't know that there's any one technology that's ever going to take over the rest. I think it's up to you whether you want to diversify your knowledge and try to learn multiple different kinds of things. But I would always caution, and I call that breadth of knowledge. And so breadth of knowledge is like learning lots of different things. Like I want to learn Python and Ruby and JavaScript, and I want to learn like Postgres and MongoDB and Cassandra. And I also want to get into DevOps and learn about AWS. And I also want to learn about security. Well, that's what I call breadth of knowledge. You're learning lots of different areas of technology. The danger there is you only have so many hours in the day. And so there's only so much depth that you can do in those technologies. And depth is how well do you know those things? I once had someone apply for a job, and literally on their job, they had listed like 30 different programming languages and 50 different frameworks. Like it was ridiculous, the stuff that they were listing on their resume. And I'm like, do you really know all of these languages? They're like, yeah, I've done a project in all of them. I'm like, okay, well, tell me about the projects that you've built in this or that, like really obscure language. And it was always like, oh, I built, a to-do, list kind of tutorial kind of project. It's like, okay, well, I could go do a to-do list tutorial in all of these other things. It doesn't mean I know all of the intricacies and all of the fine detail of like how to use that technology well. And so it, I think early in your career, it can feel like I've got all the time in the world. I can go learn all the things. I think it's still important to think about depth of knowledge when it comes to that sort of thing. I think going deeper on fewer topics earlier in your career is actually a better way to go. It's just my opinion. Everyone's going to have differing opinions. Some people say there's balance to be struck. Other people are going to say like, yeah, go learn a little bit of everything and kind of become an all things to all people kind of employee. It can be helpful for some kinds of companies like consultancy firms and startups. If you know lots of things, you become a more attractive employee because you can handle a lot of different things and you can handle a lot of different kinds of jobs and you can do lots of different kinds of work. But the expense there, especially earlier in your career, is that you don't learn the depth of knowledge that's needed to really do the job well. And what can happen is you end up burning yourself out trying to learn the depth that you need for the capacity of what that job needs you to do. And so I think you have to be careful with that sort of thing where you're not overextending yourself by trying to learn too many things at once. So just as a cautionary tale, I would say earlier in your career, focus on depth more than breadth of knowledge. So learn fewer things, but learn them really well. Like learn them extremely well. Do lots of different kinds of projects in a given programming language. And then if you really want to go learn another programming language, pick one other programming language and go rebuild all of those other projects in that new language. By doing a project over again, you already know the problem space, you already know the solution. It's just the implementation that you have to do. And now you're going to be able to sort of transfer all of that knowledge from that other technology to this new technology. So whether it's a new framework or a new language or a new database, whatever, you're just transferring the knowledge from one thing to the other. But the deeper you go, the more of that knowledge you can transfer over to the other thing. But if I do a Hello World tutorial in Angular, for example, going back to the question, and that's the only thing that I do in Angular, the only thing I'm ever going to be able to do in some other framework like React is another to-do list tutorial, because that's all I've built. That's all I know. And so by building a variety of things, you'll be able to transfer the variety of knowledge to something else. So early in your career, do more depth than breadth. Once you get a couple of years in as a developer, then I think you can afford the time to decide where you want to focus your career and say, okay, this is the kind of developer I really want to be. These are the tools I'm going to need. I'm going to go learn these tools extremely well. I can still go learn like little fringe bits about this or that other technology, but I'm going to learn these things extremely well and do them extremely well. And everyone's going to be a little bit different on what those technologies should be, and that's okay. I think that the experiences that you're going to bring to the job then become much more varied as well. And again, I think you can position that in your conversation with companies to explain why you're a good candidate for that job. So kind of going back and circling all the way back to the beginning of the stream, how do you answer the question of like, why should we hire you? Tell me about yourself. You can talk about like, this is where I'm taking my career. These are the skills that I'm learning to head in that direction. Your company's also headed in that direction. And so this is going to be a great place for us to work together because I bring all of these skills. Plus, I really care about what your company is doing. It's not just about the skills. I care about the customers that you're supporting. I care about the same sorts of concerns like environmental concerns or community concerns or whatever it is that the company does. When you apply for a job that is only skill-based, and you say, I'm applying for this job because I only have the skills and I don't really care about your company, I'm less likely to hire you. I'm less likely to continue in that interview process. I want to know that you care about what my company does. Because you're going to make a more passionate employee than just somebody who's really dialed in on a particular technology. The risk that we take hiring you in that scenario where you don't really understand the company and you don't really understand our vision, but you have the technical skill, the danger there is if we change the technology, are we going to lose you as an employee? That's the first thing in the front of our mind if we were to make you an offer is, okay, well, you're like a really amazing Rails developer, but if we decide not to do Rails anymore, are you going to stay with us and keep growing? Or are you going to bail and go find some other Rails job because that's what you know really well? And so again, when you get into like transferring that knowledge and where you want to take your career, it can drive a lot of those kinds of decisions. So yeah, I think I'll wrap up there. Thanks for asking a couple of questions in chat. I appreciate that. I always love interacting in chat. Sorry for cutting it a little short tonight. I'm still a little under the weather from the shoulder surgery, but recovery's going well. I started physical therapy today, and that was a little rough. So I got some rest ahead of me. Sunday stream. I think I'm gonna have someone on the stream on Sunday. If I can reach out to them and coordinate that in time. I think we're gonna get into some resume reviews. I thought I had done a ton of interviewing, and if I can get him on the stream, he's going to be a great one. He's actually done way more interviewing than me, and done management way longer than I have, and so I think he's going to have some additional perspectives on hiring in tech and how to hire differently than even I have. He works for a really great company in the Denver area, so I'm going to do my best to get him on the stream, and we might get through a couple of resume reviews. So. Feel free to submit an anonymous resume if you want to get that on the stream. I think I've got one or two more kind of queued up, but in chatting with this person, they're also really keen on doing resume reviews with me as well. So we'll hopefully get some resume reviews in on Sunday as well. And if that happens, we may go a little bit over on time, but that's always fun too. Other than that, thanks for hanging out tonight. Appreciate the questions in chat. Haven't really got the energy to go find somebody to raid, but go find someone fun to follow on Twitch, and we'll see you on Sunday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. That helps all the algorithms and stuff. Hopefully you watched this long in the first place, and we'll see you on the next stream. Have a good night, everybody. Cheers.